sensor that they've installed right near their restrooms, so if you want them, just go there. Yeah, I want to just read out some introductions, just so you all know who you're, like, the incredible people you're speaking to, or who will be speaking to you. I'll just like raise your hand when I say your name. Okay, I'll start with Yashica. Yashica Dutt is a journalist and the author of Coming Out of Dalit. She spent a decade covering arts, culture, and fashion in New Delhi, and a lifetime hiding her Dalitness to pass as upper caste, until she came out of Dalit in a Facebook note and wrote a book that's part nonfiction, part memoir, and wholly a scathing account of how the caste system operates and affects Dalits in today's India. Hint, brutally. Her work explores the intersection of caste, class, and gender, and seeks to expose caste as an invisible arm that turns the gears in nearly every system in India. Coming Out of Dalit has received immense critical acclaim from the press and the readers. It has been called an eye-opening contribution to Dalit literature and a book that will likely play a major role in influencing the millennial expression on being a Dalit. Dutt graduated from Columbia Journalism School and lives in New York. She's planning to soon release Coming Out as Dalit Worldwide. Mimi Mondal writes science fiction and fantasy stories and a column called Extraordinary Alien for Hindustan Times. Her novelette, His Footsteps Through Darkness and Light, is currently a finalist for the Nebula Award, and her co-edited anthology, Luminescent Threads, Connections to Octavia E. Butler, received a Locus Award and was a Hugo Award finalist in 2018. Mimi grew up in Kolkata and currently lives in New York. Dr. Suraj Yengde is an award-winning scholar and activist from India. He's an author of bestseller Caste Matters. The book went to reprint within a week of its publication date. Caste Matters was recently featured in prestigious best nonfiction books of the decade list by The Hindu. Suraj is an inaugural postdoctoral fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School's Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy. Suraj is nominated to India's highest literary award, Sahitya Akademi, and is a recipient of Dr. Ambedkar Social Justice Award, Canada 2019, Rohit Vemula Memorial Scholar Award 2018. Suraj is recently featured in a multi-part series on caste in America, sponsored by the Pulitzer Center at WGBH. Suraj inaugurated a popular column, Dalit Dalati, at the Indian Express that centers on the issues of caste in India. Suraj Yengde is an academic activist and noted public intellectual in the transnational movement of Dalit rights. He's actively involved in building solidarities of Dalit, Black, Roma, Indigenous, Guraku, and refugee people solidarities in the Fourth World Project of Marginalized People. Suraj holds a research associate position within the Department of African and American Studies and a non-resident fellow at the Hutchins Center for African and American Research. He is also a convener of the Dalit Film Festival. And this panel will be moderated by Dhrubo Jyoti. Dhrubo is a journalist and writer based in New Delhi. They work with the Hindustan Times and write on national affairs at the intersection of caste and sexuality, especially focusing on histories of caste apartheid, elections, and citizenship. They're closely linked to the movement around caste and sexuality in South Asia that aims to decenter upper caste voices from the LGBTQIA+ movements. They hold a master's degree in astrophysics and a diploma in journalism, and are interested in exploring the links between caste and queer desire through the works of B.R. Ambedkar. They live and love in Delhi. Thank you again for coming. I'm just going to hand it off to you, Dhrubo, to moderate. And
Thank you so much for joining us, especially on a Saturday morning. What we're going to do is we will begin by asking each of the three panelists to maybe do a short reading from some of their work, and we'll take some provocations and questions from that initial reading and go on into the discussion, hopefully leaving a lot of time for interaction and to respond to any questions people may have. So in whichever order would you like to begin? No?
Yes.
Big round of applause for Yashica, please.
So the book is not out in the United States yet. But I hope a lot of you have the chance to read it soon. Coming Out as Dalit is a book that I wrote in 2019 about my experiences of growing up as a Dalit person but hiding my identity and basically having a window seat to the upper caste universe in India. And in 2016, I was able to talk about my identity in a public way. I was able to reclaim my identity thanks to Rohit Kamila. I hope most of us here are familiar with Rohit. He was a scholar who was institutionally murdered because he chose to raise his voice. And he left this beautiful and scathing last letter which affected all of us, I guess, if I can say so, on the panel very deeply. And for me, what it did was it lit this flame that I knew I wouldn't be able to be quiet anymore. And as a result of that, Facebook note where I acknowledged my coming out as a Dalit person came out this book. And I'm going to read a paragraph which talks about the time when I was in a boarding school in India. And just for a little context, this is part memoir, part non-fiction, so it weaves my personal story with stories of other Dalit people and analysis and reporting and facts. Because, you know, as we know, that it's always questioned on our personal narratives. We're always told we're fake, we're lying, we're not saying the truth. So I wanted to supply as many facts as possible. The steely resolve to do whatever it takes to educate children isn't unusual in India. Most parents who grow up underprivileged, especially Dalits, cherish the life-changing quality of good education. They make do with the bare minimum or sell properties they have painstakingly built over the years to pay for their kids' tuition. For many Indian parents, their children's education is their greatest achievement. If they happen to be Dalit, it means even more. Educating their children after previous generations were cruelly denied any form of learning becomes their life's work. It's also far more challenging since most Dalit children can't really afford quality education. In addition to the financial barriers, Dalits also face hostility from upper caste society. Even more so when girls are being educated. Delta Meghwal's father, she's a Dalit girl who passed away, skilled. Delta Meghwal's father, Mahendra Meghwal, faced similar opposition because he sent his daughter to a distant town to study. Delta was 17 when she was allegedly raped by a teacher and murdered at the polytechnic she attended in Bikaner, Rajasthan. Bright and ambitious, Delta was the first girl from her village to complete high school and leave to study outside. Even as his neighbors in the village blame her education for her death, Mahendra Meghwal, a Dalit educator, remains proud of her achievements. A similar sentiment drove us to stand in front of the principal's office at Mussoorie Public School in India. My mom held on to my hand tightly. She must have felt as nervous as other Dalit parents who took an immense leap of faith for their children. She was taking a huge financial risk and had no support from anyone else except my dad, who kept himself in the background. We didn't have the money to pay the fees, yet we hoped that my sister and I would secure admission. Mom knew she had to convince the principal to allow that. I knew I had to be good enough for him to do that. Before I went in for the interview, she looked at me and asked, "Ho jayega na?" Which means you'll get in, right? I had no option but to say yes and make it happen somehow. They gave us 3 weeks to return with school uniforms, rain boots, bed sheets, evening uniform, and the bulkiest winter clothes I had ever seen. This time, Mom openly told me to hide my caste and answer Parasha Brahmin when someone asked. She wasn't worried about my sister, who was much paler in comparison and could easily pass for upper caste, and barely 3 years old at the time. We arrived deep into spring session, weeks away from the quarterly exams. Even then, we didn't have the fees in full. My grandfather knew he had no choice but to agree to sell the property that we had in Jaipur, but he dragged his heels. The school administration that had already done us a huge favor by agreeing to let us pay after the due date has passed, balked when we couldn't pay it in full. We spent the morning and afternoon going in and out of offices and waiting to see the school principal, a silver-haired educator in his late 50s, P.K. Katyal. On his way to lunch, he agreed to meet Mom and Dad, only to tell them that he couldn't help. Mom shuffled out of his office, wiping her red eyes with a corner of her olive green chiffon dupatta. She had come so close to be turned away at the gate. Throughout the afternoon, Mom and Dad visited every officer who was in the school administration office, hoping one of them would understand how important this admission was to us. Each time Mom returned to check on us and sat next to my sister, my baby brother and me, her face bloated from crying for hours. I wanted to scream, "I don't want this." Except my screams never made it past my throat. As I sat there, watching the circus of her humiliation with mute horror and shame, I knew I did want the admission as much as my mom did. I knew this education would change my life, and I was willing to let my parents grovel for it. Eventually, Mr. Katyal gave my parents 6 weeks to pay the rest of the fees and agreed to admit us. By then, shame had turned into great bitterness. I knew no matter what I achieved, it would be because I had let my mom bleed and cry to make it happen. That's why when weeks later, the same principal, Mr. Katyal, called me on stage to announce to more than 400 students and teachers that I had scored a high rank in exams with fewer than 10 days to prepare, I felt nothing. To my mind, if someone like me could score so well, then the school couldn't be all that great. For years after that, this sentiment persisted. No institution that accepted me could be all that good, including Columbia Journalism School. I was never good enough for anything. And once I became good enough, it stopped being good enough for me.
Okay. So does this work? Hi. So I mostly write science fiction and fantasy, and I write about India, but most of my publications are here, so I primarily write for an American audience. But I'm from India, and so what I'm going to read from is the story called His Footsteps Through Darkness and Light, which is a long short story called a novelette, and it's currently nominated for the Nebula Award, which is a thing. But it's a story that takes place in a circus, and I have a series of stories that take place in a circus in this fictional version of India, really. So there is some historical research in it, but the historical research is also like mixed up with each other, so it's not tremendously, it's anachronistic and so on. So I'll start, and the voice is male, the first person. I am not a fighter. I am a trapeze master. At the majestic Oriental Circus, which had been my home for 2 years, I had climbed the ropes deft and fast, till I was the leader of a team of about 15 aerial performers. It was in my genes. There were other rewards too of the circus life. It had brought me to the grace of Shehzad Marid. A trapeze master has no lack of duties, training and overseeing his team, but I continued to perform with Shehzad in his grand stage illusion show, Aladdin and his Magic Lamp. I took great pride in my own trapeze act and the team that I trained from scratch, but I have to admit that Aladdin was the crowd's favorite. None of the credit for that popularity was owed to me. I'm a genius at the ropes overhead, flinging myself from grip to grip so gracefully you could believe I could fly. But on earth, up close, I'm a man entirely devoid of charm. Before I joined the circus, I did not even speak a language that could be understood in polite society. Even now, I fumble for the right word at the right moment, occasionally slip into an accent that makes the city people sneer. But as Aladdin, all I had to do was to put on a pair of satin pants and a skull cap and parrot a series of memorized lines. I had never met an Arab street urchin, nor had an inkling what the words meant, but neither did anybody in the audience. I bellowed, Ya Allah, and Sugar hai, and Dafa ho ja shaitan, and my cues. The girl who trained the parakeets doubled as the princess in a shiny ghagra and choli, adorned with sequins. Johuri, our proprietor and ringmaster, completed the cast as the villainous Jafar, dressed in a moth-eaten velvet cloak. It was an almost ridiculous performance, but it turned into the most renowned act of the majestic Oriental Circus, all at the touch of Shehzad Marid. As the three of us hemmed and hawed through our scripted gibberish, the genie would emerge from his lamp in clouds of curling smoke. Illuminated by our cheap stage lights, the clouds would take the shape of a magnificent palace, the gaping maw of a cave, raging armies on horseback that crashed into the audience until our entire circus tent would erupt with gasps and applause and cries of horror and disbelief. A small child could hold open his palm and receive a dancing huri, crafted immaculately of ice as the clouds condensed. Then they billowed up again into monsters, swooping rock birds, clerics whose voices soared in prayer across minarets that pierced the sky above a faraway mythical city, hundreds of jinn, and then back to the only one. It was a show unlike anything offered by any rival circus company on our land. Just let me know if I'm running out of time. I was assigned to this act 4 months after I joined the majestic Oriental Circus, a naive, illiterate village young man who had been given a job by Dayaram, the former trapeze master, almost out of pity. It turned out that I climbed better than anyone else on the team, but I had never seen a circus before, could hardly follow the shimmering line between illusion and truth. Before I took over, Johuri would play both Aladdin and Jafar, disappearing behind the clouds and reappearing in changed costume with a lightness of foot you wouldn't expect from a fat middle-aged man like him. But then no one at the majestic Oriental Circus was merely what met the eye. The circus life is not for the mundane. Johuri had been happy to delegate Aladdin to me. Okay, I'm almost done. An agile young man was more suited to the role than himself, he had said, with a wink in front of the entire company. I nodded along. The both of us knew that was just the cover. A circus troupe has no dearth of agile young men. No, we both knew it was because I was the only other person at the majestic Oriental Circus that Shehzad Marid had entrusted with his lamp. That was super introductory, but yeah.
You can take my time.
No, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Dhrubo, Yashica, Mimi. These are one of India's most recognized word slayers, and sharing a panel with them is really an honor, and thank you for making my life enriching, because when I read, I feel more connected. But let's acknowledge the great work of Ben and Priya. Let's give it up to them for really putting this together. And I also wish Ben and Christina good luck for the rest of their life. Thank you, Anu, for offering this space and the Ambedkar initiative. I was thinking, what to speak on, and then I was asked to speak from the book. So I think it's when I write and when it's published, I very rarely go back and read. So so it might sound for me almost like first time. On Dalit nationalism I will speak. But before I speak on Dalit nationalism, I'll talk about how important it is, for example, to have more Dalits into the spaces. Right? You see, you have Ben, and what has Ben done? He has created more spaces. He has democratized the otherwise Brahminical, patriarchal setup of how this cesspool of casteism has given us. And I think Ben has really proven that. And so thank you, Ben. Dalit nationalism. The Dalit nationalism project remains absent from radical and conservative Dalit political spectrums. Dalit nationalism has the rightful potential to demand equality on its own terms without frugal negotiations. This would set an uncompromising and non-co-opting tone of liberation. There are no national level political calls for Dalit land exclusively set aside for Dalits in rural and urban areas for the uprooted Dalit community, which is in tune with Ambedkar's thesis of separate settlement. The agricultural census of 2015-2016 states that 92% of land holdings operated by Dalits comprised of small and marginal holdings, which is not exceeding 2 hectares. The poorest of farmers belong to the Dalit community, whose operational holding is depressingly 78.06%, that is less than 2 hectares. In a casteist economic order, Dalits are the most viable, accessible, loyal, and determined labor. Hence, the logic behind putting Dalits closer to the chain of production is to extract undeniable labor. Yet at the same time, the same system is seen to obliterate every liberatory move of Dalits. Dalit nationalism is also a space of congeniality and mutual respect. It is not a space that espouses ethnocentric nationalism. It is not a geographically constricted speciality. It is a consciousness of the highest standard based on the solid foundation of respect to everyone. Dignity and justice form the crux of Dalit nationalism, which is a radical reimagination of selves in the topography of human virtues. Dalit nationalism centers its attention on the lives of Dalit, the most vulnerable section of society who need care and attention, as the society mirrors the failures of collective humanity. By redrawing the lines of human-created boundaries, it breaks the axis of separation and encircles everyone who is willing to let go of their inhuman virtues. In it, there is absence of hatred, but a firm conviction to retort to the privileged, blind, entitled oppressor castes. It is not an appeal to the consciousness of the oppressor. It is a direct action of the oppressed. I differentiate between liberation and emancipation. The essentiality of liberation and emancipation presents to us the quandary of the current Dalit condition. Dalits want liberation as opposed to emancipation. Emancipation seeks to patronize the autonomous movement of self-liberation, which is radical and uncompromising. Emancipation offers a suggestive liberal approach that is to work within the structures that are often maintained by continuing oppression through different, albeit disguised means. Working in a system that operates on confining the marginalized to the ascribed position, emancipation suggests that rulers and owners should be gentle in their murderous treatment towards their subjects. It appeals to the consciousness of the governing class. It does not prioritize the urgency of the oppressed, neither is it willing to work with the oppressed on their own terms. It instead offers a prescription, a ready-made solution to the oppressed masses on how to free themselves without holding oppressors absolutely accountable for the horrors they and their ancestors commit. And therefore, emancipation is giving a charitable act on the account of the dominant who benefit out of the oppressive system. The constitutional method as a route to Dalit emancipation precludes the call for the total liberation of Dalits. This over-reliance on the constitution, which does not make provisions for the abolition of caste-based identities, has in effect kept caste alive and intact by giving permission to uphold caste-derived virtues, which ought to be, but are not, unconstitutional. Thus, the thin line between Dalit emancipation and Dalit liberation remains blurred. Liberation equals radicalism, where emancipation surrenders to the conformity of the status quo. Liberation is a fight towards consciousness. However, emancipation takes away from consciousness, thereby enslaving the totality of Dalit pride and Dalit agency. Dalit liberation doctrine brings with it self-sufficiency and confidence of Dalits by becoming and making them governing class that is equipped to self-rule of Dalits and without anyone else's deriding patronage.
Thank you to all three of you for these powerful thoughts that you've shared with us. We're going to do one set of questions and provocations to each of the panelists, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments and reflections. Firstly to Yashica, thank you so much for your reading from your book coming out as Dalit. In your book, you talk a lot about, and this is one of those insidious things about caste, that it is both some of the most visible kinds of discrimination, but also really insidious, intangible kinds of everyday structural impact. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that, about the public life of caste, and the ways in which people struggle to conceal their caste backgrounds from public life, and also a little bit about what that then does to the public imagination of what a Dalit person looks like, or talks like, or speaks like.
Yeah, I'm going to go right into the last part of your question first. What a Dalit person looks like, talks like, speaks like, and there are 4 of us right here. And I should tell you that neither of us are the public imagination for Dalits. Neither is Ben, nor is Christina, sitting right there. We look too privileged, we look too educated, too emancipated, or liberated. And we don't look like perfect victims. We present ourselves as we want to. And when we do that, what that does is it sends a direct message to upper caste people that we are not following the caste structures they put out in place for us. And that makes them angry. That makes them angry because they understand that their days of privilege are shrinking. And that soon they will not be able to tell us what to do. And the systems might break, and that threatens them. That makes them really scared. And how they retaliate is obviously through violence. Through all forms of violence. Through violence where a Dalit young man grows a mustache and he is killed because he dared to showcase a symbol of upper caste pride, or through verbal violence by telling me on Twitter that I don't look like a Dalit person, or that I look too privileged, or I must be Christian. But there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not. But I must have a Western connection to be able to look the way I am, or being challenged, or Suraj, for example, being told that his hair is too curly, and that is, yeah, that is a real remark that I've seen on Twitter in response to Suraj's posts on Dalit nationalism. Your hair is too curly. So, yeah, that's the level of discourse on Twitter, by the way. So the way Dalits present themselves, and the way we are choosing to not conform to the standards that were put in place for us, which was don't wear jewelry, don't believe in vanity, look oppressed, look victimized. And when we don't do that, that creates a disconnect in public imagination. And like I said, people retaliate in different ways, but we are also, just by being ourselves, by visibility, what we're doing is we're challenging those norms that exist. When either of us are written about, talked about, when our photos appear on YouTube or on Twitter or anywhere else, people see that this is a way of being. That there is a possibility of being a Dalit person who looks like this or who talks like this. And going back to the earlier part of your question, Dhrubo, how caste is visible, and at the same time, it's not. So, I want to take it back to this, and we're in an academic space. So one of the ideas in academia is that caste is over. Not just in academia, in the American public sphere. Mimi and I were just talking about this before the panel, that when I tell somebody that I work with caste, or this is my work, or I write about caste, the first question people ask is, does that still exist? So it starts with us having to prove our identities, us having to prove our intersectionality within the South Asian diaspora, us having to convince people that we exist, which is in itself a lot of labor. And I don't want to just throw these terms around and not have them mean anything. What that means is it takes a toll on a human being to constantly having to prove that they matter and that they exist. And that is one of the ways caste kills you. Caste kills your spirit and caste kills your soul. Growing up in Ajmer, which is kind of a mid-sized town, we were told that caste doesn't matter. And going back to the academic point I was making earlier, in academia there's this idea that only economic status matters in India now. Caste is not controlling anything, which has been proved patently false. In studies that came out in 2018, it's shown that at least even big cities, even big urban areas like Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay, they're segregated on the basis of caste. Lower caste people, Dalits live in clusters, as any kind of segregation works, as we're familiar with. They live in clusters in the outskirts, often. And they don't have access to basic civic amenities. So what that does is it hampers your opportunity for education, it hampers your opportunity for employment, and if you're poor, you stay poor. And growing up in Ajmer, my family, had the opportunity to break out of that. We weren't living in a Dalit ghetto quote unquote, or basti. We were living in a colony. But even then, we were called the bhangiyon ka ghar. And I say that because I'm from the lowest of the low caste in India, the manual scavenging caste. And the caste-based oppression is linked to your profession. And our profession, our ancestral profession, was to go and clean toilets. So we were the house where people went and cleaned toilets, even though my grandfather was a civil servant. And what that did was people visited our home and never drank water, which is fine. We don't want to serve them water anyway if they don't want it. But beyond that, what that did was basic things. If there is a drain that needs to be put in place, whose house is it going to be in front of? The people who poured clean toilets. These small decisions are actually really big in our lives, because they feel, or the upper caste people or the policymakers feel, that it's okay for a manual scavenging household to live surrounded by filth, to be able to have to be forced to inhale the noxious fumes that they should be doing anyway. And because we broke out of that caste profession, there is a huge vengeance and anger, even in urban areas, to stop our rise, our ability to break out of our caste-based professions. And that is just one of the ways that caste shows up in urban areas. But in terms of how it's concealed, I mean, I've talked about it extensively in the book. The way it's concealed is that we are forced to conceal it ourselves. We are forced to hide our identities and lie about our last names when someone asks. Or we stay in constant fear about being found out. Where I'm from, it's this place called Rajasthan. It's this, the word translates to the place of royals. There are beautiful palaces, it's highly patriarchal. It figures the worst in all indices, whether it's violence against women or caste discrimination. I'm sure a lot of the American people might have been there to discover themselves. It's one of those places. But Rajasthan is also really high up on the index of untouchability. 50% urban dwelling people in Rajasthan believe that untouchability is okay in 2018. 1 out of 2 people think that it's okay to discriminate against me. And I knew that growing up in the 90s and early 2000s. I knew that I didn't need data to tell me that 50% people don't think I'm a human being. I knew that in my bones. And which is why when I hid my caste, or my mother asked me to hide my caste, I did it because I'd seen consequences. I'd seen the invisibility that happens when someone looks through you, when you tell someone your caste. And I did tell someone my caste when I was 15 years old, my friend, who didn't know, and I went to her house, and her parents asked me, obviously, the second question after they served me tea was, what's your caste? And I told them in a moment of rebellion, and I've talked about this before, sorry Suraj if you're bored of hearing this, but it was like a bomb diffused in the room when I told that I'm Bhangi. I couldn't even say the words Bhangi. I said I'm scheduled caste. And they were so enraged that they had to sit next to me and serve tea to me because untouchability traveled through food and through water and through tea. And after that girl, next day I met her in the bus and I said hi to her and she looked past me. It was like I didn't exist. And at that age, I learned what it would mean to not hide my caste. So even when I grew up surrounded by this extreme idea of what it means to be not just Dalit, but from a caste where till 2 generations ago your parents went and cleaned people's bathrooms, I had no option but to hide. And I've had a lot of flack for that. I faced a lot of flack for that, by the way, where people on Twitter from within the Dalit community have often told me, why do you need to hide? It's a scheme, it's a scam, you're doing it for advantage, political gain. First of all, I want to be successful. I mean, hello, that's why I work hard. So, that's one. Being a woman, asserting herself and being confident and not apologizing for ambition is, in any part of the world, a problem. But beyond that, it's also that I'm told that why couldn't I just openly come out and be proud of my caste? What does it mean to be proud of being Bhangi? Until I came out, I didn't know what that looked like. So that's why it's really, it's a complex way of being, coming out and sometimes hiding. It's a really complicated way. And when we're told, just be confident, it doesn't work.
Thank you. Maybe as somebody who's, and Mimi is one of the reasons why we started reading science fiction coming out of South Asia, so great moment for me. As somebody who's actively imagining and writing about fantasy in utopia, I wanted to ask you 2 specific things. One was to tell us a little bit more about how you value the literary structure and your practice with political thinking around caste. And secondly, about writing about marginalized characters in science fiction and what does that entail?
Okay. This may be a slightly scattered answer. So, I'm an English graduate from India. In India, we largely read literary fiction, and so I came in through more speculative fiction, really through magical realism, like South Asian and Global South magical realism, more than existing science fiction and fantasy. And I didn't know that when I was younger, but now I know why, because a lot of older science fiction and fantasy is very discriminatory on all angles. And like a lot of the older canon of science fiction and fantasy is kind of now getting rejected. It's sexist, it's racist, it's homophobic, it's terrible. And it's also really bad prose. So I read a lot of magical realism, and I read Indian writing in English, and I largely saw upper caste people, and they were stories, deeply intellectual writers. I loved their writing. I did not see myself in them, right? But that was the mode I was writing in. When I came here, I moved into science fiction fantasy pretty accidentally. And in America, I noticed, and I didn't know that before coming to America, that science fiction fantasy is a largely different environment. And they have reasonably different literary ambitions, expectations, as well as like, you know, stories and forms that they like. So I learned some of those things after coming to America, which has been like maybe 5 years ago. So, and there aren't that many other Dalit writers in science fiction and fantasy. I haven't met others. So I know Dalit literary fiction writers, but they're not really going towards the same goal. Like science fiction fantasy tends to be a lot more plot-based and representation-based, and less abstract stories and so on. And so one of the things I picked up, like the question that you asked about like world building and so on, is from Afrofuturist authors. And one of them is Octavia Butler, another one is Nora Jamison, who I really hoped would be here. She lives in New York, but she couldn't make it. And what I learned from these authors is that especially when they're writing things like dystopia, where they're writing like a post-apocalyptic world or an apocalyptic world, and you're writing an apocalyptic world, like see the general idea, general Hollywood movie idea of apocalypses that we have, like something goes really wrong, then people's lives start falling apart, right? People get a little inhuman. You have to learn new skills. And if you think about it, usually that generic subject is like a middle-class white man. So those are, you're thinking from that person's position of what the world falling apart looks like. And when you read Octavia Butler, you see that you're looking from, say, a black woman's perspective of what the world falling apart looks like, right? And it looks different because these people were not already living in a privileged world. They were not living in a safe world. They have different skills, and they also have different ways of looking at grief. Like say a person who comes from a history of slavery. How does losing a child feel to that person, right? So your world building, like, which is a very common word in science fiction and fantasy because we're always building pretty largely different worlds, unlike literary fiction, right? Your idea of civilization, your idea of history, for instance, like this is one of the things that I've read. I am really bad at like quoting academic authors. I left academia a long time ago. But like when you look at the Dalit vision of history, for instance, right? Say Indian independence, like there's conversations about when you're looking from the Dalit perspective, how much did it change, right? Like so. These are some of the ideas you bring into science fiction and fantasy that from the people who were oppressed, from the people who are already having to hide, how does a changing world look like? And so sometimes when I'm writing stories, this story does have cast, and this is actually a larger world. So, and this is on Tor.com, so the entire thing is on Tor.com if you look it up. But there are other stories which are like expansions of this world, and it's not very distant from the current world. It's almost in India, it's just not called India, so there are things like caste. But sometimes I write like completely apocalyptic worlds, except that I'm writing from a sensibility where people are not middle class comfortable. Like at least the POV character is not that. So. I have one story which I haven't published yet. I wrote it for a conference in Germany last year so there's a tsunami in a very apocalyptic world which has very difficult climate, and like, you know, entire city gets destroyed, and the POV character is a girl who lived in the streets. And now all the refugees are going to another part, like a more privileged country, let's say like America. And she is happy in a way, because now all the rich people and her are at the same level. Yeah. And like, you know, all the rich people are getting like calluses in their feet because they're walking, and she already has calluses, like she doesn't have problems. So some of these are interesting ideas for me to explore, and I mean, given that I'm a Bengali Dalit and Bengal has, like Bengal casteism is a lot more passive. Bengal casteism is a lot more ingrained, right? And even before, like I didn't really have like I didn't have a completely similar coming out experience because we do have a Dalit last name. It's just just that when I was growing up, my parents said, we are scheduled caste, we are not Dalit. Like that is what they told me. Like because my family, going back, were farmers for a while. Because like being all, untouchability kind of became more distant in the 19th century. So like my family were landowning farmers, and my mother just said, no, we're not untouchable because our family doesn't have untouchability history. Well, maybe 2 generations back, because beyond that there are no papers, right? So I knew I was scheduled caste, not Dalit. I had my last name, but I didn't know I was being discriminated within a framework. Like there was a time, in school, when I was a kid, sometimes some kids, like when fighting with me, would say things like, you look like a domestic help. And I thought, and I was told by everyone, firstly that kid is nasty, don't listen to them, and also they said it was about your darkness of complexion. And later I compared notes with like upper caste kids who were the same shade as me, and they had never gotten that. So a lot of my fiction, even before I got into writing science fiction fantasy, or even before I was very conscious about this, like I used to have all these chameleon characters. A lot of my POV characters were people who passed as very different other kinds of people. So, yeah, sorry, that's very scattered.
Beautiful.
Oh, that was amazing.
Suraj, in your powerful book that's an exposition on caste and both society and politics as it functions in India today, you're able to do the autobiography, and you're able to do a lot of commentary, thesis, kind of social exposition of what is going on. So I wanted to ask you both a little bit about the instrument of the autobiography being this really powerful and groundbreaking tool in bringing out and kind of center staging Dalit experiences of India, but also, and because politics and nationalism make such an important part of the book, ask you a little bit about Dalit political futures and what you're hopeful in that.
Thank you. Thank you, Dhrubo. See, Dalits are political subjects 24/7. So to depoliticize their own bodies it's very difficult. So that's why the scrutiny comes so scathing, because we are politically explosive, not only electorally, but also the political subjectivity transcends into non-hetero, normalizing anything. And that's why I think our placement is in a way that people are unable to fathom. People are unable to fathom, various even aesthetics that we carry as ourselves, even without caring about, the last name is a political statement, right? It's a statement of, a Yengde, a child of a, untouchable, grandchild of a landless laborer, is now, pronouncing certain, dictums and, trying to look on the face and challenge the entire structure, on his face. I think that is something that is the casteist and the world, they're not prepared. That's why they are trying to tell us, slow down, tell us more about you first, because they don't know how to reconcile, because these new ideas that are coming, they're not coming through it's coming through the force of my ancestors. Like the way I was taught, the way I was brought up, it's in my blood, it's in the way I think, it's in the way I act, and it's in the way I fight, streets as well as on debates. And I think these nuances are so much in the air, and people would like to breathe it, but it's difficult air. You have to get all of that poison that has been conditioned around us, and that's why. So when I wrote this book, there was a lot of Plato, Heidegger, and I wrote it in a very humanist tradition because I loved the Greek-Roman thinking. But the publisher and it took many people to convince me that we need your story also in this, and I said I don't want to. This is my thesis, and and it took it almost took a mini village within the friends and the community to say that you need to little bit loosen your language because you will miss an important opportunity that that you have. And I think that's where my autobiographical part, which I really tried to limit it, came in the third iteration. The first two iterations were basically, the editor will send comments and I will send back without doing anything there. I will just, add more complexity to it. Because see, the experience of caste is not something you can simply streamline in a sentence. Because it comes with so much cobwebs, and one cannot authenticate the experience just by writing in some words. It's almost musical. One has to dance through it. One has to perform to totally grasp the condition. Unless we read this and we sit it, that's very much a Brahminical notion of grasping what other is. But Dalits are beyond that. They perform. The musicality is there. The artwork is there. So we need to play around those canvases. And I think that's where we can perhaps understand, because this is the first generation, if you think in a context, who is actually writing in a way, and who is after Ambedkar perhaps I think we knew Gajendran was here many decades ago, and then now Ben and a few others are coming. Yashica was here. But what I'm saying is this is not something that is a template model, and that's why it becomes a heavy responsibility on all of us, right? Almost to stand on the shoulders of not immediate previous generation, but the generation before, because after Ambedkar there was a gap that we saw in especially the English sphere. I'm not talking about the other regional languages which are rich in repository, but within the English sphere we had to really play out the words, and there were many vocabularies that didn't make sense at all. And many of us might have an experience where, how do I, for example, the Dalit stories are written by Brahmins. Brahmins continue to, even in their goodness, the Brahmins still want to hold on to that, which is again a kind of complicated space to be, right? How do we even cross over this mountain of other complexities these people have created, and that's why in my book there is no, there are no so-called caste theoreticians, so-called caste philosophers and all, because I think their time has gone, because what they did was they complicated further. If it's homo hierarchicus, it's a good text, for any academic publishing house, but what is it? Who is it serving the purpose for? And I think we were all looking through this, and that's what the Dalit's future is where all other forms of expressions. It is definitely not heterocentric, heteronormative. It is definitely not part of any the Brahminical patriarchal formulations about looking at women in different subjectivities. It's modern, but yet there are certain fears. Many of this new, and this is my fear, especially Twitter fear and Facebook fear, is the younger generation Dalits that I see are getting educated with Twitter and Facebook and stuff like that. And I think the theoretization of their own experiences sometimes might misplace themselves. And I think my thing is they need to, go out, basically, get out of that whole spirit. Because I meet people and say, and almost a Twitter famous or Facebook famous or somebody famous is there a guiding point, which is a great thing. But again, if you look through the experiences through your grandmothers, if you don't have that experiences, or through your grandfather's life, I think that's where, because ancestral givings are something that is more unique than anything else. And I think that's why we need to democratize it very much. And that's how the fear, the future comes with certain fears for me.
Thank you so much to all three panelists for responding to those questions. Between the three of them, Mimi, Yashica and Suraj represent some of the most dynamic as well as diverse parts of New Dalit writing in India. And of course, and we've just kind of seen both the depths and the rich diversity they bring to the conversation around not just the ways in which caste tangibly and intangibly plays out in India, but also how it impacts not just the lives of millions of people, but also their imaginations. Such work is very important in English, and especially important because of the ways in which the language is able to travel, is able to inform, and is able to historicize. I also want to acknowledge that a lot of work is going on in India in various non-English languages, where writers are able to push the envelope on what is considered, and this is the fear, right, on what is considered, what is Dalit writing? And it's both rebellion, it's hope, but it's also, as Suraj so deftly points out, a fear, a caution about the future, about whether one gets pigeonholed as a Dalit writer, right? And maybe a hope for a future where writers from other castes can be also recognized as Brahmin writers, as Banya writers, as Banya writing, or Brahmin history.
That's right.
Right? And with that hope of the future, I want to open this up and invite questions, comments, reflections. Questions would be great from members of the audience.
They should identify themselves.
Yes, and if you could do a short introduction. Yes. Yes.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah.
So my name is Isaac. I live here in New York. I use they, them pronouns. It's a pleasure to be here with you all. It really is great to hear you. So I do have a question for Mimi. This is, a literary question. So as someone who's, I'm from, you could call it both a blessing and a curse being from a circus family.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, as a world that is largely both fantasized about and has a long place in speculative fiction, and it's also because it itself is a fantastical medium, wanted to ask you what it is that you see in the circus and why it is that you chose this particular world as a vessel for you to build as a nexus for your own world building.
So things like circus, things like movies, I mean, these are like super common tropes actually in science fiction fantasy for people who want to pass as other kinds of people. So these stories that I started writing, I started writing them before I was aware of a lot of politics. So but then as I just mentioned, that I was writing all these chameleon characters without knowing why I was doing it. I was like subconsciously writing all these people who passed, and I mean, I was queer before I was Dalit, like consciously. And so I was writing a lot of these passing characters, and I'm interested in history. India had a circus golden age in the 1930s. So yeah, I mean, and this is back when obviously it's a very casteist society, and this was a foreign performance. And as you know, that like all these foreign arts that came in, a lot of lower caste people went into it because the upper caste people wouldn't touch it, right? So there was a period, I mean, Kerala still has a history of like, Kerala has a circus academy or something that teach trapeze people and so on. So there were strong men, like Indian strong men that went all over the world. And some of them, like there's this one guy who passed as Mexican, and like he passed as Mexican in American circus, but he's Indian, and probably not Dalit. But there were like a lot of these intersections, and all these characters in these various stories, like some of them, like a lot of them are passing as different other things. So there's one story just has an old woman who climbs buildings in the city because she's supposed to be coming from a tribe that lived in trees that did not exist. But when I wrote it, a lot of people liked it because I was mostly getting them read by audiences here. Apparently, it was convincing enough that we tried. So, but I was just like basically examining tribal politics, like, and also when you come from a place that you're trying to hide, when you're rural, and this guy where he says that I couldn't even speak a language that the city people respected, right? So yeah, so it's actually not very, like it's pretty stereotypical to use the circus for something like that, but I guess I'm doing an Indian version of it.
Questions? and then you please. So we take both and then we'll come back.
Hi, I'm Arvind Rajagopal. I teach at New York University. Thanks so much for your presentations. I have a two-part question. The first part is asking the panelists to say something about this location, United States, which can be understood in different ways. One is as a more intensely Brahminical space because it's a space of largely upper caste migration where precisely those skills which are sort of selected and or designated as Brahmin get accentuated here. The other way to think about it, which I'd like to sort of ask you to comment on, is that because there are so few lower caste people here and so few Dalits here, it changes the dynamics of caste in a way that's maybe offers space for intervention and new kinds of behavior, new kinds of acceptance perhaps. And the second is the relationship between this space and the old country, so to say.
I will give
because all of you do move between these spaces.
I will give the more, like I'll start with the more populist answer because I'm a fiction writer and editor in science fiction fantasy, and so I look at a lot of people's Indian characters, like writers send them to me to re-edit it, and non-Indian writers, and oh my god, I am tired of telling people Indians are non-vegetarian. Do not write a vegetarian character. Like you're literally, oh, this was the best part. An author sent me a Dalit character. In great, like in good intention, this author wanted to, non-South Asian author, wrote a Dalit character, which went through 2 Indian American sensitivity readers, which means they read for authenticity of things, and I was the 3rd authenticity reader, and this character in that novel is still saying, is there a vegetarian version of this? And I am like, that is exactly what a Dalit doesn't do. Like that's the opposite of a Dalit marker. And yes, I mean, it's so unknown, and like, I didn't know Indians were vegetarian was even a stereotype before I came here.
Yeah, so going back to your question about what United States does for you and how it is intensely Brahminical, because according to some surveys by Quality Labs had a survey recently, 2% population of Indians in the US are lower caste or Dalit. And that goes to speak to the institutional discrimination that lies in India. Who gets the opportunity to move? Who gets into the institutes that sends people to come here? Who is a part of the systems, the knowledge systems, that even has the understanding to come to the United States? When I was even 26, a couple of years ago, I didn't know, how does one get to the US? What does one have to do? I just had no idea how to go about things. And the reason I was able to learn how to do that is because I saw a colleague of mine who went to NYU. And I saw what he did. And I was able to learn from that. Those are knowledge systems that exist in upper caste structures naturally. And those are knowledge systems that Dalits don't have access to. So that's why it was impossible for me to even think about moving to the US. I just did not think that would ever happen. So, and even, it took me a few years to look around and understand how normal it is for people, how casual it is that they are here and they're not grateful for every day. And of course, this is not to say that the US doesn't have issues, etc. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying just the idea and the intensity that I felt before coming here, people just don't feel that way. But also coming to the US, what it did for me was, it gave me the chance to escape the constant questioning of my past, having to justify who I was every day, and also escape the fear of being found out. It's like what Mimi said, it's very similar. That's why I frame it in a way of coming out. Because it is this double identity that you live with, where you feel that, someone will get you. They will humiliate you, and they will call you out, and they will tell you you're not Brahmin as you're pretending to be. And that stopped happening. And my awakening happened in classrooms much like these, when I heard my classmates who were talking about their own identities And I learned about the trauma that they had to go through, their different identities because of those. And then I started thinking maybe how I think about my caste is all wrong. That's when I was able to get the objective distance to understand that maybe there is nothing to be ashamed about being Dalit. Just maybe this is something I could derive some amount of power from. So moving to the US, and that's why I don't want to go back, because I can be a racialized brown woman, which is in itself a contested identity, but I'm still an Indian, not lower caste unless I want to be.
The career thing stings me so much because I have a bunch of degrees that were not a good fit for me because no one told me they were not a good fit for me. Like they didn't, like they were lyric subjects. I didn't really know what the subjects had or what career opportunities they had, and like I went into the university and I'm like, this is actually not what I thought I would be studying.
See, every colonial project is Brahminical to its core. You can date back to the Max Muller's idea of how colonialism was actually expansion of the Varnashram Dharma, and how the English took the model and created. And I think in the contemporary context, America is a so quote unquote escape route for stupid Brahmins, meaning who don't have the courage to face the social, political, economic realities, would like to adopt this way and claim it as a meritorious achievement, and which is ironical in its its bubbling. And in our context we call Buddhus. So these Buddhus tend to utilize the American programmatic dream of which was very much white middle class dream to their advantage, and to try to utilize this. And I think that's why within the caste context it gets more crucial, because we also had our own Boston Brahmins here, right? Which is itself a unique class and continues to be the ruling class in various think tanks, political spectrum. These are basically, so we have that very racialized, kind of contestation of who forms this. Now we are doing, especially at the Kennedy School, we are hoping to do this new research on identifying what caste votes for what. And in addition to that, I think our thesis premise is we have way more lower caste, which is OBC, scheduled castes, and hopefully scheduled tribes who are in America. Because post-1990s, after Mondal, reservation was there, many OBCs benefited of that, and they came over. It's just that I don't think there is any all-America OBC association, which will give access to, there are Dalit associations. I don't know about tribal associations, I haven't heard. But if you are able to create that space for OBCs to be OBC and yet be American, I think that will be a unique kind of case. Because post-1990s migration, especially in the IT sector that we see, especially coming from the southern Indian belt, OBCs were in huge numbers, and I keep meeting them. But these OBCs become Hinduized. As Kanchalaya said once, he said when he's himself OBC, he said OBC when they come to America, they're looking for two things. One is vegetarian restaurant, and second is temple. And then of course, I'm paraphrasing him, but he just was like, why don't they feel the same? And I think this American dream has totally given new edge for one to be a caste focused individual, and as well as groups. So the OBCs become Reddis, or again, they try to adjust into other Hindu groups, and you see them on Independence Day celebrations in one of the parks, and then and unfortunately these OBCs then become mobilized against their own cause, especially when it comes to the Democratic Republican even affiliation as their vote, where does it go, and even in the Indian context. So I think these, when we talk about caste, we need to not only talk about Dalit caste per se, we need to talk about all this multi varieties that inform. And I think that's when, if these come out, especially American conglomeration of multiple castes, if you look at the ethnicities, if you represent as a caste, has given that model Indian kind of system then maybe fits more abruptly into this?
Thank you. I think for me it's also instructive to constantly, and to all three of your answers kind of reminded me to also flag that so much of the literature that comes out of South Asia, especially India, also comes out of some organized cabals, right? And most of these are also, almost exclusively Brahmin or upper caste, but exclusively controlled also by Brahmins and upper caste. So, and I think a lot of the ways in which upper caste authors, young authors, are able to get patronage, access to networks, publishing houses.
I can probably speak a little bit to that because I used to work at Penguin India. I was an junior editor. But so I went out of college, university, first master's degree, and I went to Penguin India. I thought, people mostly do one master's degree, so that's what I thought was going to be my career. I hit a glass wall, like glass ceiling, really, really fast, like within a year or so. And I mean, within half a year, like they were really, really happy to have me at the office, and probably because I was a token minority, I didn't know that. But I just like kept getting passed up for like pretty much every opportunity. I worked a lot of overtime. Like people said, "You're a great worker, extra work, no money."
That's right, that they do make you feel
And
good.
which is why I kind of restarted my academic, like I went out of that. And so the fun thing, the fact that I write in science fiction fantasy and I did not write in magical realism, and I don't always talk about this in Indian communities because in Savarna communities people get super hostile, is that you're so far behind Savarna literary fiction, wouldn't even get published. The thing is, when I get published here, and I'm getting published by non-South Asian Americans, a lot of them are white people, you write a good story, they'll take it. But you're putting through the Savarna system, like there will be a lot of other factors. Like even if I sell a book from, look, a book publisher always gives you an advance depending on how much that book will sell. Like maybe even they're not being biased, but they will look at the sales value and they will give you the advance or whatever, like even an offer. Now, a name like me does not sell millions in India, especially if it comes out of India. So I was just like not going to get a book deal, which I do here. Like when I write stories with Dalits, and this story, if you read the whole thing, you can see very strong Dalit markers. Like there are places where people will just call this character, well, you lower caste, what will you understand, right? And an American editor will buy that. So coming to America, like Yashica was talking about, like it frees us in some ways. Like it frees us from that system in which we were not winning.
Thank you for reminding us that published Dalit authors in India is itself a fantasy. Can we get 2 or 3 questions? First you, and then you, and yes, the 2 of you at the back, please, and then.
So I wanted to ask you to please speak about your path and journey in finding agents and publishers and connecting with them.
Okay.
So my question is for all 3 of you, and perhaps to you as well, Dhrubo, is do you think there exists a space today for all kinds of Dalit writing? Or do you think that this Savarna dominated media and literary space is still more attached to narratives of victimhood? Do you think they consume that more than theorizations, narratives of liberation, revolution, all kinds of it?
We'll just, yes.
I just had a question. Thank you for an amazing talk. I had a question about translations. There's this weird phenomena that happens in India where Bahujan writer will be wildly popular, millions of copies will be sold, but then there's this other realm, English-speaking or Savarna realm, where no one would have heard of it, right? And there's also like an industry cottage appropriation
nonfiction, are you talking about the Blaft book?
Yes.
Oh, great. I worked with him.
So whichever you want to take.
I mean, so partly the publishing system, I mean, any publishing system, I mean, we're all working with these systems, and systems are created by the dominants, right? So, I mean, yes, clearly the market chooses certain authors, and the market chooses certain authors when the politics that support those authors become valuable. So, I mean, between translations, I mean, between the vernacular and the English, the reading public becomes different, and the economic and social position of the readership becomes different. So obviously, it's not, I mean, I feel like I'm talking about very obvious things.
You can go. I was giving you this actually.
There are a few questions that were asked. Agents, first of all, I think I'm a disruptor here, sitting over here. I was never supposed to write a book. I never wanted to write a book. There was a course in Columbia J School about book writing, and I laughed at everybody who took it. Because I thought it was there was no plan. I think the reason I ended up writing a book is because the note that I wrote connected with a lot of people.
So you got a non-fiction offer?
I got an
You
offer.
did.
I did. I got offered to, I got 2 publishing offers. And I had my pick. And that's how I was able to get an agent, because I had 2 offers. So my experience is radically different, but I also understand this is a complete anomaly. Because in a way, I was, without knowing, grooming myself for exactly this point. I understood very well how media worked. I understood very well how upper caste systems work, because I looked and behaved and lived as an upper caste person. And when I say upper caste, it's all quotes and quotes. I do not believe in the hierarchy of upper versus lower.
So yeah, so in the publishing system, that kind of recruitment is actually not very rare.
Right.
Because so, say, Suraj's work was your PhD thesis, so you had already written it and you sent it out to publishers, no?
I'll tell you.
Okay, cool. For a lot of non-fiction memoir-like books, like sometimes publishers would just look for interesting people who have interesting voices, and they will send you an offer to write it later. Like, unlike say for novels, you usually have to send them, like you have to write your novel on your own, and then like send it out to agents and like wait for them. So I don't have a novel yet. I have an agent on the strength of my short fiction. So once again, that's not a very common path, but, and when I selected my agent, because I could take a pick, my agent is American, because I do sell in America. And I chose an agent, my agent actually represents Nora Jennison as well. And I chose an agent who picked an author who did not have a market at that time, like maybe a decade ago or so. Black women's science fiction was not selling. The publishers didn't care, like they clearly openly said who wants to read science fiction by a black woman. And this is an agent who picked up this person. Nora Jennison won 3 Hugo Awards in the last 3 years. Like she is, if one science fiction writer from our generation is remembered, only one, it would be that person, that black woman. And I wanted that agent who can see a writer who's good, but doesn't have a market yet, and believe in that writer and place that writer in the market. And that's what I prioritize. Which once again, not everybody has a privilege to, because usually your agent chooses you. Like you send out to all the people and whoever takes you. So I mean, I can't really give that out as advice.
Yeah,
But
but I
that's a good
do
thing to
want to
look at,
say,
right.
it's telling how there are 2 people here, all 3 of us did not come through traditional forms of publishing. If we were, we would not be here. The reason, yeah, I mean, that's what I was saying. I was a journalist. I knew how to work the system really well, and I worked it to my advantage. I wrote the way I knew that would sell. I wrote articles that I knew would prime me for this, and I think that knowledge really helped. And I would encourage all of us to go and to get that understanding and game the system if we can.
Those excellent questions. Since we are on the agent topic, agent has a negative connotation in India, Dalali, and I was always, had that mental pressure, so I've never, gotten one. So this was basically, most of the time the publishers were like, I have this book idea, and they were like, yeah, let's go. It just worked out because the editors at the publishing house were very, approachable, kind people, and I was like, whatever. So I didn't pay attention to the whole global rights and all, and I think.
So do you have an agent? Do you not have an agent?
No, but like my.
We need to get you an agent.
My boss was like, he put me in touch with an agent, and even so I was talking with Arundhati Roy. She was like, yeah, bro, you gotta get one. So she's like, I'll speak to my agent, and you
But
can.
I studied publishing studies. I mean, I could have, like, that was one of the jobs I was looking at.
So, and of course, now when you talk about, public and agent, and, there are 4 publishing house academic, and they want me to write something, and, they've already said, why don't you do this and that. And so, there is always this interest. One is really pissed me so hard, just a few days ago, writing a biography on Ambedkar. He's like, you gotta write a biography on Ambedkar, and this is how we'll plan it, and, and it was a very intense conversation, and I enjoyed his interest. It's like, wow, how well, he thinks I'll write about my hero, which is, I've been thinking about that. So the translations, Sharan Kumar Limbale wrote his Akkarmashi, and it was translated at The Outcast by OUP, Delhi. And the translator actually, instead of, when you read through the translator's note, he's almost like putting down the guy he's translating, because Sharan Kumar Limbale was not really happy about certain translations, and they had, of course, there's always back and forth, and so when I read that, guys, I was like, what an asshole, he's actually translating this important book, and this guy was a Brahmin translator, and then even you go and read that in translator's note, he just calls out like Sharan Kumar Limbale as almost trying to say that inefficient kind of a person, and that really gave me, and so my book currently is in 7 languages. They're undergoing translation, and I was like, I don't care what caste the person is, they need to respect the politics of it. I just don't want them to be a project that they can add on there. So that's not going to work with me. I want someone who will be committing at least for some years to the cause. Or else there's no point in me giving chance to somebody or elevating someone this way. That's just like a And so in Marathi translation we have to cancel too. Like I don't know how to read Marathi, but the other for Tamil, for example, I took advice of Paranjit. Hey man, what do you think about this? And when he said okay, then so the reason that being is the richness in non-English sphere is Babul or Bagul, for example, because I know how to one reads that, man, and it's like the world is circling around. Literally, the X-Man, the bald guy when he goes there and the world, that's literally what this, this writing kind of gives us. And to just answer Christina's question is, I think, I've been thinking about it that, there has to be a Dalit Writers Guild, which actually, promotes a space. We've been thinking about it, more workshopping, and more kind of support mentor based kind of things, because if we have let's use the networks, right? I mean, I'm happy to so many Dalit writers now to come to me, and I'm like, I push for the publishers I work with, and I can use the moral pressure to accept that, and because there is always this policing of styles, policing of the phrasing of statements, and most of the time it's typographical. People like they don't know. I'm like, you gotta do this. Then they always use the same merit argument, but in a very lewd way. It almost feels like cringeworthy. Like, why you even say that? This is such a thing they have written, and so the code polishedness and all that. So if there is a space of such sort that kind of creates a new, I mean. Science fiction, come on, man. I mean, I don't know any Dalit writer, at least in English language, who thinks through that space. Many of us have been forced into writing autobiographies to almost like, have an exhibition of our victimhood. So one feels guilty, almost the Christian guilt one has for momentary, and then what I want to do. And they have trapped us in that hole so strongly that one cannot but go and crying about it. Untitled Chapter once said, when I read this about autobiographies, he's like, this is basically asking to cry more. Just asking to lament more. And I think there is more to that. There is more to sensorial, spaces. Roja Singh actually wrote a good book which talks about musical, how women use music to perform, especially Dalit women in their villages. And I think these diverse genres, the Brahminical space doesn't know what to do. Because they only know two things. One is celebration and one is pain. Because that's how the grief and as well as the celebratory festivities circle around that. There is nothing that kind of alters. For us to think about celebration is to challenge the very status quo of the Brahmin or the Brahminical order. And I think that's something nobody wants to risk. Because if I write, I'm going to challenge their ancestors. I'm going to call out their criminal caste groups who have put my ancestors and continue to put people like me and my fellow Dalits down. So that idea is so threatening that they will always alter. And this happens when I write columns too. They're like, all this, slashing. And that's why I think, to answer to your question, Christine, I think we need a kind of a guild in a way that will, yeah.
So I have some thoughts about that as well. So I also think more than a guild, because a guild, like as soon as you start an organization, there need to be people running it, right? I also think some of us, those of us who have a little more money, etc., can get, say, a Dalit literature student who are like all over there in India, right? Or here, wherever, to say do a monthly column in a major newspaper or something of Dalit literature, where this person is reading all kinds. So this person, like a literature student, is more or less reasonable, or a literature graduate, is equipped to read science fiction and non-fiction and whatever. Like, you don't really need a lot of background to read Dalit science fiction because there's one person. So, if somebody is reading just Dalit as a vertical, say a monthly column in a newspaper, where 1 month there's non-fiction, 1 month there's poetry, 1 month there's translation, and maybe there's just one author. And even if, say, the newspaper isn't paying them a lot, because a lot of Indian newspapers don't, if some of us fund that person, like if we're giving them the books, we're sending them the books, we're maybe, newspaper giving them 4,000 or maybe even nothing, we give them $100 each one they write, right?
I like that.
So, like that brings the work to the attention to a lot of people, because we form a guild, only we will know each other. Like writers are public-facing individuals. You need to get the work to the public.
Yeah, I also want to answer Christina's question. I totally agree with you, actually. I think the space is not ready for stories that are beyond victimhood. And you did an excellent review for my book in school, and you wrote that too. One of the reasons my book has connected so much, because it is, it forces me to show people my pain. And of course, when you bleed to death on the page, people connect with it. But I often wonder, if I didn't do that, would it have the same impact? And I'm also thinking about the next book. If I'm not showing my wounds, will that have the same impact? Because, like I said earlier, I've been very strategic about how I wanted this book to be and how I wanted to reach an audience. And writing about these stories, which are nevertheless true, was a very informed choice. Because, like I said, media narratives, I understand how they work and they're controlled. But also, I think people like us on this panel, each one of us, and you included, now we can create a platform and push stories forward. And like you said, Suraj, push forward stories of celebration and joy, and stories that are not just our pain, not just glorifying it. It's called, what is it called? Pain porn? That's beyond that. So I think, thankfully, we should be able to create a platform that does that.
Also, a lot of this conversation is also constantly flagging the complete precarity, right, of the lives of many writers who come from our communities and do not have the kind of institutional support that a lot of nephews and nieces of upper caste authors have. Yes. and then maybe you can come here and from there.
So thank you all very, very much for speaking about, I think, very different ways in which each of you engages with the word, in some sense, right? So there's experimental prose, there is, I think as Yashica was saying, a kind of very considered sense of the way that narratives work and their impact, and Suraj, in a sense, experimenting between the ethnographic, the autobiographical, the sociological in some sense. So I wanted to actually go back and ask about this question of the relationship between imagination and sort of realism. And to go back to something that I think Suraj said about going back and thinking about, I think you said your grandmother's world and what she had to offer. And I think I'd be very interested to know what, and any of you can take this up, or all of you, but what it is that for you is forms a kind of canon or some set of must-reads. What kind of imaginative or experimental work for you actually allows you to go beyond the demands that Dalit writing has to be about identification? So especially Mimi, I see, is sort of posing this question of disidentification, right? You're actually sort of thinking about worlds that you don't inhabit and that you have to kind of think yourself into or imagine kind of other selves and so on. So I'm just very interested in what you read or what allows you to think about your own writing and aesthetic practice at some level.
So I
We'll just take a couple of more questions.
Sure.
And then to you.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you all for being here and holding the space for all of us. So, gathering from what you talked earlier, I'm wondering what's your experience in the Indian diaspora here in terms of how you experience the caste system, and also related to that, how do you couch this topic of caste system to an upper class Indian person of the Indian diaspora here in America?
I don't. I largely don't hang out with Indian diaspora. I don't go to festivals, and the only Indian friends I have are like these activist community people who I know have a certain kind of values. Like I never go to unfiltered Indian spaces.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking this question is because
Also too much vegetarian food. Who wants that?
yeah, the reason I'm asking is because I feel it's important to bring this subject to people, because some of my friends and classmates I grew up with and they are here, they are completely clueless about it, and they say, where is the caste system? I was there with you, but I didn't hear any such questions, such comments, such insults.
Maybe just take that question and we'll come back.
Thank you. So Suraj, I was really struck by what you said about emancipation and liberation. I think it can apply to all different struggles. And I'm guessing, and my question is, because you are all in the literary space, and literary space in India as well as in the diaspora in the US is quite, I'm sure, upper caste. How do you navigate those spaces and those kinds of invitations? Like, for example, if you all were invited to the Jaipur Literary Festival, which we know is a total, whatever it is, and knowing that in many ways you're tokenized as like the Dalit writer in that space, how do you navigate that?
I was at JLF right this year, and I actually had to struggle a lot with should I accept the invite, because JLF, the sponsorship that they have, that is, Z Network is a fascist supporting channel. We're all familiar with that. It's not new. And I struggled with that question a lot, actually. Should I go? But here's the thing. How many spaces do Dalits have? And how are we expected to exist in a system that is built to keep us out?
And so, like, the onus of quitting should not be on us.
Exactly.
The
And
onus
that's
of
what.
quitting should be on the people who have benefited from that system
Right.
forever. Like, we're just beginning to benefit from it. Let us benefit a little.
Not just that, also like, let's be there and then reach out to other people. I think that's extremely important as well. Like what you said, maybe the onus of quitting should not be on us, and the onus of explaining our identity to upper class people shouldn't be on us. It is not our job. It is not our job to go and tell an upper class Indian person, hey, but listen, I am really discriminated against. Like, never happened to me, but it really did. I am not entering that conversation.
Sometimes I'm just rude. I mean, you're uninteresting. I'm like, am I interested in explaining things to you? No.
Exactly, it's not the job of
Try to
Dalit
be a fun
people.
person.
No, exactly. We are not here to educate upper caste Indians who already have a legacy of caste, who have turned a blind eye to how they only marry within the same caste and never question that. I think they know.
Right.
I mean, with regard to how to navigate, and I think that's the that's why I'm using in a very caution to be pioneer, quote unquote, or to be a person or to start off has always had to bear two responsibilities. One is hitherto nothing has happened, and so you have to now carry the whole burden, and you think yourself too much. And second is you have to give a direction, so the next year or the year after or whenever they do this, there is a form. I think because of these two dancing moves, it just kind of outmaneuvers many of the acrobatics one has to do. Me personally, I don't give a damn to them. I don't give a shit, really. Why is the moralistic claim always on Dalits?
Exactly.
And many times, especially these Brahmin lefts, have enjoyed every privilege their grandmothers and gave them through the ownership of land, and suddenly came here and became leftist. And now want to talk all about moralistic things and like fuck off. Get the fuck out of my eyes. Otherwise, I don't need all this bastardized grammars on me. But what they are usually doing is they're trying to find a lacuna of some sort. Now, the way I do is because also I think I come from a social movement, I have a background. Like I can subvert intellectually as well as other ways. And I know how to work it out. It doesn't mean I'm invincible. There are a lot of horrendous barriers, and especially because you see, you write something, and I don't see myself personally as a literary sphere. I think what I always try to put out myself out of that. The reason being, I would rather be an organizer and a social movement. Whatever comes out of that, if it becomes a literature, fine. But literature has always become like a wine and dine concept. Basically, in India, it's very Brahminical. You have state literary conferences, and in that, it is mostly this sensorial images that they present through various. And the Dalit sphere had to create their own Dalit literary festivals way back, 1955s and all onwards. We know this element existing. Dalit literary sphere, if you talk about, then I am all for it. If you talk about other whatever non-Dalit literary sphere is, I will have a slight hesitation to even accept, because it is built on a very fragile egos of upper castes. And they really want to, navigate their own selves. And so I get invited to all this, events and and I am looking for Dalits in the audience. I'm like, anybody Dalit here? Raise your hand. And I say, thank you for doing it. Because you deserve the thank you. Others have always been self-congratulating through TVs. When they read a column in the paper, they feel, oh, such a nice. But for Dalits, there is no space there. They have to struggle.
Exactly.
So my thing is, I love my people. And I will continue to love them. And I will love them also as a form of protest. Because I am told not to love my people. The deformities. You see, every time, for example, when a Dalit assertion comes, they talk about the subcaste among Dalits. Oh, but Dalits are not united. I tell Brahmins, even you are not united.
Yeah.
RSS is a Brahmin house.
Yeah.
Communist is also a Brahmin house. Close to 550 subcaste among Brahmins. they seldom talk about them. And for me, it is to make a universalist, moralist claim to now say, I don't align with this Dalit politics now. Wherever I go, people are asking me, what do you think of Chandrasekhar Azad? I ask them back, what do you think of Sitaram Yechuri? What do you think of Nirmala Sitharaman? They are confounded. You have to answer, bro. This is a space of how Brahmins are occupying almost every other space, and their failure is becoming a national failure. Yet, Brahmins are not held accountable for that. The entire state, and that's why the whole economy is falling. Nobody is holding accountable Nirmala Sitharaman right now. But the gestations towards something else has been done. Whereas in our spaces, and that's why, be it literature or be it any other form, I call it's a Harlem moment for Dalits.
Yeah.
It's a unique space. I mean, it was not possible. I mean, Anu's been here for so long. It would not have been like self-published authors and reputed journalists, coming and claiming that space. So on the American example, as they have answered, I studied in 3 different continents before coming to America. So I have a slightly, it's not like coming straight from India, right? And so for me, the racial aspect is very central. I look at how Indians are racist, irrespective of caste. Because they support a system that is oppressing black people.
Yeah.
And on the black victimhood, South Asians tag along. I never understand. When they came from India, they have a story of poor parents coming.
Oh my God, yes.
Why are you even saying this? Were your parents enslaved here? Were your parents incarcerated here? Did you have to face that immediate oppression? I understand your individualized familial story has a story, but when it comes to celebration, you will sport your Janayu as a medal of honor. So you can operate in these 2 spaces. And I think these dilemmas that we operate into, where now I have to do 3 works. One is de-racialize the South Asian makeup. Second, insert caste consciousness into this wholesome nature. And third, tell them we are not Republicans.
This is going to be the last set of questions that we'll take. You and then you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Renu Sheher. So, as some people in the audience know, and I'm sure the speakers know, that Ambedkar, in the mid-50s, converted to Buddhism to protest, the caste apartheid that unfortunately is a part of Hinduism, and kind of led a neo-Buddhist movement, because at that point, Buddhism had largely, I wouldn't say died out, but it's definitely it decreased in influence by at that time. Do you find that amongst the current generations of Dalits that they are turning to Buddhism even today?
I was curious, 3 of you obviously have spoken a lot about sort of the distance and sort of separation you feel from being writers and artists in India and coming here and maybe not wanting to go back, and very understandably. So I'm just curious about the sort of other groups or other struggles that you maybe look to for inspiration or for solidarity, and just where you've maybe seen others. I think you mentioned Afrofuturism, for instance, as one where there's no other writers in science fiction, and I wondered if there were other communities, like Native communities, who kind of created their own artwork in their own spaces that you guys have taken influence from.
Was there another question? Because we'll just end with this round.
Hi, my name is Raghu. Thank you so much for your panel. I know Suraj, you read Marathi, and I saw some Marathi sources in your book, and I know Mimi and Dhrubo read Bengali, but I wonder if you could share with us how the discourse of caste might be much more advanced in other languages, and maybe what we could learn
So the question that you asked first, I read, and I'm still actually pretty new to science fiction chemistry in America 5 years, and I actually spend most of it reading science fiction fantasy, which is something that I'm expanding from. So I'm reading poetry, I'm trying to read some Native American work, which, I mean, a lot of that has, like, I largely read different kinds of people of color, science fiction and fantasy for a very long time. I read, if you're asking strictly outside South Asia, so like refugee science fiction fantasy, like from different refugee communities from other countries, people who were persecuted by their countries, and these are ways in which I didn't study history in India. So, like say, the fact that a lot of Sikhs in this country are kind of refugees from 1984, right? Like, refugee is a term that India does not get to use because India, like these atrocities, these pogroms that happen in India are globally don't get recognized because India always has the clout to not get globally recognized, which means, well, I am technically a refugee. I don't want to go back, but I came in with a student visa. I had to, right? So these kinds of refugee narratives, South and Central American refugee narratives. So, but I largely read a lot of it through the lens of science fiction and fantasy, and I'm finally beginning to read Native American work, which means, okay. And you asked about Bengali work, right? Wow. I'm recently reading Manoranjan Vyapari, but I didn't read a lot of Bengali Dalit work. Now, a couple of years ago, I would have just said there isn't much, but I have learned that sometimes when I say there isn't much, it means I haven't seen much. Because I used to read more in Bengali when I was younger, but my parents kept me tremendously shielded from the Dalit community, which is like, since I did not really write an autobiographical book, and I haven't talked about my autobiography, but that's also one vertical, where my parents did not, like, my parents really submerged me in Savarna culture so that I didn't get to really, like, I didn't know any other Dalits growing up, so I didn't know, and I'm still trying to find out what Bengali Dalit literature exists, really, yeah.
Yeah, so this book is a result of being inspired by the African American struggle, as far as I'm concerned. The reason I came out and the reason I can identify what passing even meant was because I knew that this was literature and cinema that was a part of African American universe. And Anupama, you asked a question earlier about inspiration, and this is directly related to your question. I was in class with Marianne Hirsch, for those of us who go to Columbia might know her. And we talked about passing, and in that module, we also looked at a lot of movies in the 1950s. Movies on passing were really big in Hollywood. A lot of white directors wanted to sensationalize who are these people who live in these two worlds, and how they're able to go in and out of them. And there's a really popular movie by Douglas Sirk, 1959, it's called The Imitation of Life. And it's the story of this woman who can easily pass off as white, and her mother, who's African American, is also working in the house, and she rejects her completely. And she rejects her entire life. She comes and meets her, and it's really traumatic and tragic. She comes and meets her, asks her how she's doing, wants an emotional connection with her. And this young woman doesn't want anything to do with her until she dies. And at her funeral, in this version, this movie has been made 3 or 4 times, but in this version, there is this beautiful, and I say beautiful because it was really beautiful for me to watch that, and intense funeral scene where this woman is now finally having a moment of reckoning about what she's done. She's not only lost her mother, but she's also lost her identity. And when I watched that, and I'm so grateful to Professor Hirsch for making me watch that film, because I think that was the moment in my head when I came out. When I watched her mourn the loss of the life that she could have had, I immediately thought about the life that I could lose if I didn't do this. And since then, since that class, every time I kept thinking of ways to come out and not have to, maybe not out myself completely, maybe not reveal myself, maybe write an article somewhere, but really as an upper caste person. It was not possible. What that movie did for me and the narratives that I read changed me. And it was just not possible for me to hide myself anymore. And beyond that, I think the movements that I strongly feel aligned with are the Latinx movement. I find their struggles of, the challenges that they face, the undocumented community here. I find a lot of solidarity there. I'm involved with a few spaces in Brooklyn, and there is so much space and solidarity there for us to share our struggles. And that's deeply healing for a bunch of us, to be in those non-white spaces, to be in those radical spaces, and just to be heard unconditionally, without being challenged, without being questioned, without us having to prove ourselves, because struggle sees struggle. And I think not just me, I think a lot of us here and all Dalits really identify with these struggles against white supremacy, struggles against patriarchy, but only if they're intersectional. And it becomes a life source. I don't have a connection to the Indian community here. The only connection that I have are my friends and other activists who understand where I'm coming from without me having to explain that, which is why for me it's deeply important to be connected to these movements and feel validated in some way.
You want to speak?
Thank you for those three questions. On the Buddhism part, thank you Randy for bringing that up. I think Buddhist identity is very militant. If you look to Ambedkarite Buddhism, it's very radical, it's very political. It's actually one of the pain in the Hindutva RSS project, because the Ambedkarite Buddhists, they are very feisty, and they almost wherever they go, they run a movement. Like in America too, you have the people who grew up in that, because the Buddhist ethic that is given to them, which is very Navayana type, which kind of removes them from the totality of the meditative spiritual aspects only. That gives them a space to anchor, and that's why I think many new Dalits, for example, who didn't grow up with Buddhist identity, now they look at Ambedkar did that, there has to be some purpose, and I think there is a lot that is now taking place in that, and more organizations like BAMSEF, who's operating deep into villages and all, their approaches, basically, Dalits have multiple religions, and each saint, who came in various parts of the regions, the 17th, the 18th century, they gave new identities to them. And now it's a thing of the separate Dalitness. We had Adi Hindu, Adi Dravida, Adi movements, and then also we had Guru Ghasidas, for example, in the Chhattisgarh region, and if you go in the Tamil, most probably Ayutthas, so Buddhism, and then there are Christians. So I think the independent identities exist, but now the thing is, how do we bring them out as a subject that can challenge? Dalit Buddhists have managed to do that, because of course it was a call of Ambedkar that could work out. So on the solidarity aspect, and I know it is something I've been thinking about it, is to, for example, when the Dalit Panthers wrote, Raja Dhali, for example, and again, this is how, if you occupy this space, I'm planning to get Raja Dhali's writings into English and publish it, because a very, very, very crucial, important voice coming out of that. He was translating African American poets, in the late 1960s, into Marathi, and he was the kind of guy who thought of that vision. And unfortunately, of course, the organization died, and but it has not died completely. It is alive in many of us. The Panthers are still, but what couldn't happen is the Black Panthers knew almost nothing about the Dalit Panthers. I went and talked to Bobby Seale and his team, and they were like, "Wait, what?" and then of course, Catherine Cleaver knows. I think she's at Emory. and we are trying to do. But now the idea is, these panthers are alive. What if we get them together under one space? Be it India or be it America. And let them at least meet once for their life. Jabi Pawar is there, and many other panthers are alive. And here also, I think if we are able to do that, maybe it's us to discuss, but I think this is really a dream of being in American space kind of things, to work. To answer Ratik's question, I think, I grew up in Ambedkar Nagar. Now you can't go any more than that. There's no, and it's, my dad was a Dalit Panther. Of course, later he joined after he went to Kanchiram's movement, Bamset, and then, we see BSP kind of. So, most likely in the kind of background I come from, we are given 2 books to read. And they are Annihilation of Caste, Jati Vyavasthicha Vidhwans, that's how it is called in Marathi, and Buddha is Dhamma. And I read that book, Buddha is Dhamma, and this in Marathi. So whenever you go for little competitions, you win something in your gully, there are 2 books. Most likely you read this. And Annihilation of Caste is a very difficult text to understand if you come from a non-background at all, because Ambedkar is writing hell lot of references, which thankfully, yes, Anand has done a good job to annotate that and give us where Ambedkar is drawing and bringing that forward. But the translations are done by Dalits themselves. You see different translations and they are so beautiful. But some of the people, for example, and again, that's why Dalit literary sphere, when I make distinction, these are not like trained scholars. These are basically one who's working for a best bus company, who's a driver, who's a conductor, who is a bank employee. Dalit Panthers were Jabi Pawar bank employee, and Rajan Hale was working for some other government service. They did that and still did the other work of producing literature. So that's why the literature cannot be seen in the sense of very Shakespearean, where sitting and inventing new words. No, these are the new formulations. Now, within the translation framework, I am very committed to the non-English sphere, because I think that has given so much validity. The Dalit movement is alive because although Ambedkar wrote much of his writing in English, his speeches and all were in Marathi. The speeches he gave, which is basically again a huge repository and richness that comes about it. So within this translation framework, within the language framework, what we see is a kind of inconsistency, to use our language. And why is that inconsistency? Is because each time frame is looking at Annihilation of Caste differently. That's why Annihilation of Caste, if you read immediately when Baba Ambedkar, of course, in 1936, and he gave, and it came to me. I remember reading first time and I was like, I thought my dad is punishing me. This is so difficult to read in Marathi, especially written in a very jargonist fashion. And until unless you understand that type of Marathi, your Buddha is Dhamma, for example, and Phule. Also, I should mention, Phule's writings are also, rich Marathi language. Unless you are part of that, in a way, subaltern culture, it's difficult to understand. Because Phule is like calling out Brahmins in a way where we are like, you should not be so crude and so rude. But then, we get the sense of it. And I think that's why the layerings that we have produced ourselves, and that's why I'm when I say my fears are this, that the origins have to be held on to. They cannot be filtered through social media things and other, no. There is a lot that's happening there. And that's why I'm saying, many people, the Twitter theoreticians, we have to be careful, because there is much more to that, what happens. And just to conclude on Mayawati, for example, there is a lot of negativity around Mayawati, and especially I tell you here in this spaces, Brahmin women have bitterly criticized, and these are the Brahmin women who claim themselves as feminists, who claim themselves as the global solidarities. And when I dropped Mayawati, the M word, you can see how this comes back. And this is because Mayawati doesn't quote unquote converse in English. Mayawati doesn't have the rapport. But I'll say, did Jayalalitha have any rapport? Did Mamata Banerjee had any rapport of that what you are trying to, but this caste kind of framework fits into adjusting this complicated narratives of people like Mayawati and other, courageous women from these backgrounds.
just on Mayawati, I think it goes back to a question on visibility and how Mayawati presents herself. She looks like an obvious Dalit woman that can be called out. And I think how people, and Indian feminists in particular, when they react to Mayawati in such a strong and way that's filled with bitter hatred, they're also reacting to the visible markers of her caste, the way she does her hair, the way she dresses, the way she presents herself. I think those are all factors that matter. And when coming back, which is why it's so important that as Dalits we present ourselves and just radically assert who we are without being apologetic about it.
Thank you to our panelists for this wonderful conversation. I think also to Ratik, I think one of the things that really come out when one talks about Bengali literature, because Bengalis won't stop talking about themselves, is that
You say themselves and not us.
is also that is also kind of flags the importance of autonomous Dalit political movements, which are so alive in many parts of the country, but which Bhadraloks have systematically ensured have not bloomed in West Bengal. Thank you to our panelists for having done all this conversation, really educating us on a lot of ways in which young Dalit writers are holding on to both the power and the precarity of their writing. I think just goes to show that new Dalit writing doesn't mean one thing and kind of means all of the things that they brought to the table. Thank you so much.
Let's also acknowledge this person sitting next to me, because I think Dhrubo has been very humble, but I think being in the space they are and doing the thing they are doing, I think really deserves a commendation on, and then let's give it up to Dhrubo.
Thank you everyone, thank you panel, thank you Dhrubo. We will break for lunch. There's like Indian lunch right outside, restrooms on your right side. Please wash your hands. And don't serve yourself, there are volunteers helping you.
Coronavirus in your head, hasn't it?
So, please, we'll join at like 1:30, 1:45ish. So we have two more fantastic panels. We have Equality Labs, Moni joining us for the next one, speaking about Dalit and digitality. And then we have another intersectional panel right after that. So
Christina is on it, please. Christina.
come join us. Have your lunch and come join us.
Thank you so much.